Hey gang, Shawn Shepheard wants to know, are you asking the right questions? Oh, better yet, he wants to know, what types of questions do you enjoy asking most? Hey, on this podcast, John and I talked to Shawn Shepheard. He's a keynote speaker and executive coach. He's been doing it for a very long time. We ended up keying in on a pattern, a theme throughout the podcast of asking good questions. So important in our personal and professional relationships. We cover many other topics on how he works with his clients, and he was very generous at giving us even some methodology on what we as entrepreneurs can take out and use with our own teams. Immediately, the next meeting you have, you can use some of what you'll hear in this podcast. Here's Shawn Shepheard. Shawn, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you. Talk to us about some of your entrepreneurial journey in the development of your company and a little bit about where you are today.
Sure. So I guess, without knowing it, I started it in high school. I don't know if you've got them in the US, but I was like an ice cream bike delivery guy. So the big bike that you sell ice cream, and the young lady that I worked with said, there's no hourly wage, you get a percentage of what you sell. So I figured when I was 14 years old riding an ice cream bike, that the more I sold, the more I made. And I thought, well, there's something to it. And so followed that thread along. And I still say the best business training I ever got was I worked in a restaurant for 9 years as a server and a bartender. And I'll never forget, Rich, when they were training me to go serve tables, we had to do 4 shifts and with staff, and you don't get tips on those 4 shifts. And after the first night, we're all cashing out and the servers are cashing out. And the manager said, Shawn, who do you want to work with tomorrow? And I looked across the table and there was a guy that made $500 in tips. And the person I worked with that night made about 110. And I'm like, I want to work with him. And so I guess that was my unofficial entrepreneurial, steps without planning it. I never planned that. And fast forward to today. So I'm a business coach that works with owners of small, when I say small companies, anywhere between 5 million and 30 million a year, family-owned businesses. The owners have already had a tremendous amount of success. So I take zero credit for any of that. They've had a lot of success, and I help them get to the next level without always being on. So enjoying more growth with more time off to enjoy all the good things in life, family and friends.
Got it. Thanks for that intro. Talk to me more about, was there more to the story on the business training from the restaurant other than picking the 500 versus the 110 guy? Is there more business training you got out of that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I've met my wife at the restaurant too, so I'm very grateful for that. And I had gone to my first year of college, and then I took a year off and started working in the restaurant. I'm like, I don't need college. I forget that. And I was making money every day, and my wife had said to me, you really should finish your college, and I did. I went back and finished, and the restaurant paid for it. But I'll never forget, after I graduated my first quote unquote real job, at the end of the week, I got a paycheck, and I looked at the paycheck and I thought, you got to be kidding me, right? What are all these deductions? What is all of this? And it's contrast. And I think the one theme throughout my life and for a lot of entrepreneurs is we need contrast, right? We need contrast to really see where we stand. I know that I did lots of different things in work and you don't appreciate things until you experience other things. And I say that with people that have been in the same industry for for 25 years or have been in the same job, you have 1 year experience times 25. And to be able to do lots of different things and learn from each one. But I think there's beauty in contrast and seeing what you like and don't like, and then just building from there.
Talk to me more about that when it comes to contrast with the business owners that you do coaching with.
Yeah.
How is contrast relevant and useful for them?
I think in every level, like you can put that, it's kind of like the hot sauce, you can put the contrast on everything. So I'll take, for example, customers. So if I say, tell me about some of the customers. So they're probably going to tell me about the biggest pains, like the worst customers, and they're going to tell me about the best. Everything in between is kind of, in the middle. It's kind of like our day. We get home at the end of the day, we'll talk about the things that stand out. Everything else is just great. So the thing is, when you start to ask questions about what makes the best customer, and then they go on and, oh, they're fantastic and they love us and they share the word and it's mutual. And then when you ask the questions about what makes the hardest, most difficult, that's when they actually get physically upset and it keeps them up at night. And then just hitting the pause button, because there's beauty in the contrast of those two. If I say, if you could only work with one of those types of customers, what would it be? Well, they're like, well, of course, it's this. Then I might pause and go, well, why don't you only work with them? And then there's this a long, awkward silence. And my business, I made a decision about 4 years ago, which was the hardest decision I've ever made. And I went from working with anybody that would pay me to going to an invite and referral only business. And I had to say, goodbye to a lot of big clients. And I'm talking about big international brands. And when you do that, it hurts. It hurts a lot financially. Everybody close to you starts questioning, like, have you lost your mind? Like, people like really want those clients and you have them. And it was really hard. So I can't say that in the moment it was a great decision, because it was really painful and I lost a lot of income and it was tough. But looking back, by far, not even close, the best business decision I ever made. And to bring it back, Rich, to your question about contrast, is the only way that I knew that was by working with a lot of different people in different environments.
So it sounds like you use the contrast and the beauty of that to be able to identify what you want and what you don't.
Yeah.
And then you work with business owners on getting more of what they want and less of what they don't.
Yes, and absolutely. And it sounds simple, right? Because I think people try to overcomplicate it. So when I'm talking, like doing presentations, I'm like, I could give you the 3-hour workshop answer with 85 PowerPoint slides, or I can give you the 5-minute one that you can apply immediately. The thing with that is, when we focus on, like when I talk to business owners about your favorite customer, why don't we just take ridiculous good care about with those customers? Why don't we make it so easy for them to spread the word for us? Forget all these big marketing budgets and all that other stuff. Why don't we just go all in with them? Because you know what? I'm going to guess that they hang out with people just like them.
That's great. On the making it easy for our good customers to refer us, turn us on to other good customers, what would be 2 or 3 of the top tactics that you have seen entrepreneurs implement?
So the number one thing is show them how much you care beyond the sale. So I talk a lot about companies spend a lot on customer acquisition only to get them and then forget about them. And I don't even like the term customer retention, because it sounds like jail, like retention. Oh my God, we got to keep them. No. How about some customer love, some customer success? How about some show you care? So I think it's like, if you pick one day or one hour a week as an entrepreneur to love your customers without trying to sell them anything, oh my God, do that. As far as like content, give them stuff worth sharing. And that means not just about you and your product. Think of, when the pandemic started, I lost like 80% of my business overnight because it was in person. And it sucked. So I'm not going to be here and say, hey, it was a learning opportunity. It like really sucked. And I reached out to one of my friends and said, like, I don't know what to do. And he said, like, best advice ever. He said, you know what? Write down all the customers and clients that you love working with or you loved working with in the past. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, do it. So I wrote down, I had about 12. And he said, every day you wake up and you serve them. The next couple of months are going to be challenging regardless if you sit there and mope and whine, but wake up. So, I actually turned my phone off and did my focus time. And I thought, how can I serve for each one of them? And not as a group, individually. And my poor wife, oh my God, I think all her shoulder problems are because of me. Because I'm like, hey, can you film these videos? And you know what? For each video, I would say, so Rich, if you were my client, I'd be like, hey, Rich, it's Shawn, just thinking about you. I know your team is probably going through, and with all the problems and the pandemic and kids and homeschooling, here's one tip, because I know Tom on your team is probably like, what do? I can't take clients out for lunch, right? And then I would give you one tip that you could apply. This was not a fancy video. This was my wife on my phone. And I did, I think, 87 of those videos over the course of the next 5 weeks. And you know what happened? People genuinely said thank you. Like, that was a highlight of my day. One of my biggest clients said, hey, do you mind if I put this through the senior management team? And I'm like, sure. And the thing was, I got that one client. The president called me 3 weeks later and said, Shawn, we have a lot of high priced consultants. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm not one of them, by the way, but that have like disappeared. But you just keep showing up and serving. And so it's stuff like that doesn't cost you time. That doesn't cost you money. It just costs you time. And it shows that you actually care and know a little bit about them.
Mm.
Yeah, that's awesome, Shawn. I want to bring this a little bit back to the beginning because there's already like so much information and content here and what you've experienced with your business as an entrepreneur, let alone what you're helping other entrepreneurs experience. But, one of the things I look back through, some of your profile, you talk a lot about how you can get a return on investment on life and work. Mm-hmm. And you talked about how you help business owners get to the next level.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious as to what you mean by that exactly. But, when you say it, it kind of makes me think about, there are business owners that are going in and chopping wood in the trees in the forest every day. And there are business owners that are able to rise above the trees, see what's going on with their business and kind of take is that what you mean by that? Getting to the next level? Or can you be more specific on exactly what your objective is there with small business?
Yeah, absolutely, John. So I think back to one of my favorite business books, The E-Myth. By Michael Gerber, so a fellow Canuck, and he talked about working in the business or on the business.
Yep.
And so I think that, and North American culture, we celebrate the entrepreneur and the 20 hours a day working and ordering a pizza and sleeping on. We celebrate all of that, and I'm not, that's important. It's also not sustainable, like health-wise, anything. So Marshall Goldsmith wrote a book many years ago that what got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
And so I use that phrase all the time. When you get to a certain level, and so the owners that are calling me, so I'm not calling them. That's a big difference. I used to be the one making the phone calls, and I'm not saying that in a arrogant, cocky way. It's when you do what I just talked about, when you love your customers so much, they can't help but spread the word. And then those people are now calling saying, hey, so sure. When they call, it's usually the conversation goes like, hey, Shawn, I built my business from nothing to 5 million, 10 million. And now I want to get it to another 5 million or 2 million, whatever the dollar figure is. And they don't know how to do that. They don't know how to do it without changing what they do. Because it goes to that age-old question. If you ask, like, how do I double my income? Your mind will go to just doing more what you're doing. Well, there's still 24 hours in the day. We have lots of innovation, but we haven't got a longer day, right? Yep. So when you actually ask different questions, your mind has to go to systems and different thinking. Yep. The biggest thing that I work on with clients is actually taking them out of low value activities, putting them back into what they can do and only do best, putting them back in the seat of being an owner and not doing everything. And so my joke with most of my clients is, I'm kind of like the bouncer, right? I'm the guy saying, no, you can't get, John, no, you can't. Like, I know you've just walked into his office for the last 10 years. That's going to stop. And I will tell them, blame your crazy Canadian coach, because they're not going to like it. But what they will like is building the company and everybody grows together. Mm-hmm. And that's what I mean by, you will see. And usually I try to get them to experience a win very quickly. And I'll say this quickly, John. One of my clients, so the first thing I did was focus hour 1 day a week. And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, turn your phone off. There is an off button on the phone, by the way. Yep. Turn your phone off 1 hour every day and just work on big picture stuff. And he was kicking and screaming. Like, after about a month, I sent him, you know, when you go to the hotel and they have that lockbox where you put your passport and everything? Yeah. I sent him one of those to have him lock his phone in the lockbox. Finally, like, doesn't happen overnight. Then maybe on month 3, he texted me the best message. And he said, you know, I was so resistant, kicking and screaming, focus hour a day. I just got a $150,000 opportunity that I would have missed 2 months ago. And I'm like, you're welcome. Right? So, but that happens every day. But we need to create that space to grow and to think. Like, if I say track all your time, where do you think? Because all of the owners are brilliant, but where's the thinking time?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting because when you start a business as an entrepreneur, it is a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and years of going at it. And it almost seems to me that a lot of entrepreneurs, and I've been there certainly myself, and you guys have probably been there, where you kind of have these blinders on that you feel you got to keep doing what you used to do in order to kind of keep the business going. But when you get to a certain point, you know, you mentioned a really good thing, which is you got to start asking yourself different questions. And sometimes it's hard for you to recognize that, which is the value of a coach, you know, a performance coach or an executive coach asking you these different questions and having you work on your business. So what I got from this real quick in a short period of time, which I think is fantastic, right, is if you're a business owner, entrepreneur listening to this episode, and you are not taking an hour a day of strategic planning, focus time, you are doing your service, your company, your family potentially a huge disservice, right, by not working on your business instead of working in it. That's one big key I've taken away already. Give me one or two other samples of things that you just tweak a little bit with an entrepreneur that really changes kind of how they can work on versus in their business.
So let me just, and great question. Let me just add to that, because I know when I started doing this and I did focus days, like Monday was phone off focus day. And I'll never forget, you know, and a lot of people go, oh my God, a whole day, like an hour is hard enough. The challenging part is, even if an entrepreneur starts with that, like, I'm going to do focus hour, I'm going to say some of them are going to start shaking by putting the phone away. They will, because we live in a distracted world. But then when they do, like when the first time I did it, I was like, okay, I set up my office. I went to the library. So change environments is a good thing. It's harder, I know, during these times, but change environments. I had my coffee and then I sat down and I was like, okay, well, what do I do? Because I wasn't used to it. So the tip that I'd start with that is where I call, you know, they're Pomodoros, 25 minutes. Ask yourself one question. So questions could be, what's the craziest idea that could work? What's the one habit that I could start developing that would change everything? The conversation's a big one too. Susan Scott, the author of Fierce Conversations, our lives change one conversation at a time. Who do you need to have a conversation with? And it might be you. So when you have that, give yourself the focus of one question only. Because I don't want a distracted focus hour. I want a focus hour. The second thing that I would say on how to an entrepreneur to get started is I always say, what do you want? Right? So the golden question, the first question I ask when I start working with clients and teams is, the oh my God, Shawn question. So I know there's lots of versions of it, but hey, 3 years from today, we meet for beverages or lunch. And you start off by saying, oh my God, Shawn, the last 3 years have been off the charts, wild success, personally and professionally. What does that look like? I pick 3 years because 1 year is too short. So 3 years, they can start to dream a little. And often, John, they will sit quietly and not know how to answer that. And so when we dive into that, I need that first. And I've always said, if they don't have that vision, then you don't need me yet. You can do there's other people that can help you create that. I'm not that guy. But when you have that, oh my God, I can get you there. Yeah. And some of the follow-up questions to that is, okay, here's the big vision. How do you need to start acting differently starting today? How does your team, the easy question for owners is when I ask them, how is your team acting differently? And they'll go, oh my God, Shawn, and they'll give me 10 things. How are you acting differently? Well, what do you mean, me? So when you start taking the big vision and bringing it down to behavior and habit level, that's where you see change.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right. I've taken a practice recently, Shawn, based on an episode we ran here with Dr. Julie Bell, who has said, take a blank sheet of paper 20 minutes a day and just strategic think. Yeah. And usually on any given day, I don't know what to think about unless I ask myself a question. But then as soon as I start going with the question, it's just a never ending thing. And 20 minutes is up and I'm like, oh my gosh, that was way too quick. I got more on this question. So it's a really good point that when you take a focus time, just ask yourself a question. And even it could be a wildest set of questions. So I love that idea of, have a focus time, but have a very specific question that comes with it. I want to kind of segue way off of this because you brought up another point, which, it was a question, but it's a book I've never heard of, and it's something I truly believe in, but something I think we do way too infrequently as entrepreneurs or as people in general is Purest Conversation. Rich, have you ever read that book?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so another book for Rich to go buy on Amazon after this episode.
There you go.
But tell us a little bit more about Purest Conversations, why they're important, and how they play into an entrepreneur's life.
Yeah. It was, so it's Fierce Conversations. It's Fierce by Susan Scott. And so the thing about that is, let me say this. I used to work primarily in corporate, big multinational companies. And now I work in small family businesses. The biggest difference is the quality of conversations. Not even close. So I know I'm overgeneralizing, but a lot of big multinational companies, they don't have honest conversations. There's a lot of butt kissing. There's a lot of politics. And when somebody like me comes in asking questions, often they don't like that because they're like, hey, you know what? We don't need somebody like Shawn. Our quarterly earnings are pretty good. We can avoid that. We can avoid that. And now the funny thing was for years, I tried to swim upstream and convince them to the power. And it was tiring. It was exhausting. Now, the first conversation when they call me is they're like, we need help. Oh my God, that's like water in the middle of the desert. So the conversations are the key. I mean, the quality of our life is based on the quality of our conversations. And I have had times when I've led sessions for teams and they're like, that was the best meeting we've ever had. And it's not because of me. It's just I gave them good questions. And the advantage of having an outsider ask those questions is it's taken differently than it is because there's interpersonal and history and everything else. I can ask really hard questions. I'll give you one example that I do with executive teams. So if I go in Zoom or in person, and there was one that I did, a keynote that I did about 3 years ago. So it was everybody in the company, about 200 people that they flew in to their annual retreat. And there was 9 different divisions. And the person that hired me said, everybody in the company, 9 different business units. Can you in 45 minutes give them a plan? I'm like, I'm not a magician. I'd be in Vegas if I could do that. But so what I did was I just asked questions and I gave them all a workbook. So I take the best of keynotes, but I didn't like keynotes because it was one way. I want it to be interactive. And who am I? I'm not the substitute teacher that they're not going to listen to. I want to ask them questions and record. So I'd ask questions like I'd start with, okay, the number one question is, what are your top 3 business goals for the next 30 days? And I remember one guy was like, could you get more clear? And I'm like, the top 3, but if you're sitting down with your boss in 30 days, what's going to make her really happy? And if you don't know the answer, we got bigger issues, right, than that. So that's cool. So then the second question, I'm like, I know every day is different. Yes. You got 2 minutes to write down the top 10 activities you do every day at work. And then they start writing them down. Okay, everybody got 10? Cool. Third step is, the 80-20 rule. If you could only look at the top 3 goals, they're your goals, and look at what you do every day. And if you could only pick 2 things to move you, what 2 would they pick? Usually that's really easy. They get it like this. Oh, it'd be 1 and 2. Great. Now the conversation that they need to have internally is, what are we going to do with the other 8? So I say you either got to delegate it, eliminate it, or reduce it. But how you do that is by having real conversations. Mm-hmm. And I remember doing this with a small sales team years ago, and there was 9 people in the room. And somebody had said, nobody's ever asked us those questions. And one of the action steps was, why do we all have to be in all these, it was conference calls, right? Pre-Zoom. Yeah. And then somebody came up with a solution. Hey, if that's my lane, why don't I just go? You guys don't have to go. I'll do a little summary if you're interested. And immediately the manager was like, I'm cool with that. Oh, well, why didn't we do that? Because nobody's asked those questions. And so the thing is, when you ask those questions, that's where but the key that I'll say, John, it only works if the team trusts each other. Mm. If there's a lack of trust, those questions aren't going to help.
I'm curious, when you get to the other 8 and say delegate, eliminate, or reduce it.
Yeah.
Most organizations, and I'm guilty as well, are pretty terrible at stopping doing things. Yeah. Really good at innovating. Yeah. Really good at coming up with new stuff that is interesting and innovative and it gives you energy. But then to actually call, we're going to stop doing this because it doesn't serve enough people. Even though you're stopping, there's still some value that some people are getting out of it. Do you have any suggestions on how to eliminate things?
Yeah.
That's a very difficult thing I find with entrepreneurs.
I think absolutely, Rich, and personally and professionally. I mean, my doctor tells me that I shouldn't eat hamburgers, right? So, I know knowing and doing are 2 different things, right? So I think that you need to put the value, because there's 2 things I would say. There's the current or old company, and then there's the new company. The thing that makes it easier, if you have a clear vision that's articulated with everybody on the team, hey, you know what? We're at 10 million right now, blah, blah, blah. I really believe we could be at 15 million in 3 years if we do ABC you need to start with the vision, because they're not going to buy into it if there's not a vision tied to it. Then it's like, but we need to do these changes. Hey, if you like bonuses, we need to work on this. Two things I would say with that. Everything's an experiment. You try something, and then I have all my clients do this, and you can ask them like I'm dog on the bone. End of the week, I always say, what worked? I call it review the game film, like I'm a sports guy. What worked this week? What didn't? And what are you going to change next week? And it's that constant improvement. So if you try something, Rich, and it's like, okay, well, this worked, this didn't, what are we going to change? It's like a football team that's getting, crushed at halftime. They got to change at halftime, right? So that's number one. And number two is that whole, if it's tied to the future vision, if it's not tied to when they can't see the reason behind it, because people are resistant to change. We all know that. And why are they resistant to change? Because if it's not tied to, it's not clearly articulated, they're going to make up their own story on why we're doing this. And it's probably not going to be the one that you have.
So I got two things out of that. Ask yourself what worked, what didn't, and what needs a change. And the other
every
one
Friday, do it. Everybody on your team should be doing that every Friday. Forget the annual review. Dumbest thing in business.
I like it. And then vet things by the future vision. If it doesn't serve the future vision, even if it's good, even if it's interesting, even if it gives you energy, like if it doesn't fit the future vision, make a decision and get rid of that.
Yeah. And it's hard because the future vision is the unknown. And we know all of us don't like the unknown, but we also know all growth lies in the territory of the unknown. So the pandemic, if nothing else, it's taught us lots of different things. Was none of us could have predicted this. None of us could have predicted how everything changed overnight. But guess what? There's been more innovation in the last 16 months than in the last 20 years, because we had the growth-minded leaders. I have no worry. The organizations that were married to the blinders on, good luck, right? Good luck. But then you just figured it out. And then you're like, oh, maybe we do this. And so now going into the next chapter, I'm good friends with Joel Bennett, who was a previous guest on your show. And I said to him months ago, I'm like, it's our opportunity as entrepreneurs right now. It's our duty to create the new model in 6 months, because we can't wait for companies. They're looking for us for leadership to build that model for them that works. And now, I had one organization. So pre-pandemic, I'm in Toronto and I flew 5 hours to Vancouver, do a 90-minute session, flew back, 10 hours of flying, then 30 days later did the follow-up. So 20 hours of flying for 3 hours. This year we did it on Zoom, and the boss said, oh, this was way better. And guess what? Yeah, it was way better for me. I didn't spend 20 hours in an airplane, and the business results were better. They never would have came to that. They never would have been open to that before this.
How do you use that now for your new company? Because I don't think you're unique in you found efficiencies in not traveling. So I'm curious, as for you personally with your company, how do you now use that to vet what trips you're willing to take and what trips you're not? Do you have principles around that you use for yourself?
Yeah, I always want to know what's the goal, what's the outcome, and then reverse engineer it. I can pretty well tell with all my clients, it will be a combination of virtual and in person. But before, the virtual might have been the side dish. Now it's the main course. And to supplement things. There's clients that, I'm going to Boston in October. It'll be my first time on a plane in 17 months. And it's so funny. I work with that executive team every week. I've only met one of them in person. And I brought that up in a meeting last week, and they're like, oh, real? That's weird. Because it feels like we know each other, right? Like we're in each other's home every week. So a couple of things that I'll say to Rich that, and again, I'm not taking credit because I wasn't that smart. I would have figured it out a long time ago. What's possible for you and your business now that wasn't before? Sure, we've had the technology for years, but now people have seen it and know what's possible. So one example, about 2 months into the pandemic, there's a colleague that I work with in Los Angeles, and I said to him, like 2 years previous to the pandemic, we're going to work together one day. I just don't know when or where or what we're going to do. And then 2 months into it, I said, you know what? We could work together now. And he's like, oh, tell me more. And then he talked about one of his clients that he wanted to bring me in, which would have meant flying to LA. And you know what that led to, Rich, was we co-facilitated a session for one of his biggest clients in California for 8 weeks. And I never left the chair. Never would have saw that before. From there, I've got other clients now in Australia that can bring me in for 20 minutes of their meeting that we could have done that before. And then this story, and this is kind of going back to John and asking good questions. So this was maybe 2.5 months ago. So I had a business owner client on a Monday morning on a coaching call. Getting to the end of the call, and he's like, oh, before we go, last 10 minutes, can I ask you some questions? Because I have a team meeting tomorrow morning, and I'm kind of stuck on this. So I'm like, sure. He gave me the situation. I'm like, okay, grab a pen. Here's an exercise you could do in the first 15 minutes. So he's writing down frantically, but I'm seeing he's kind of stressed, right? And I'm like, dude, what time's your meeting? He's like 9:30. I said, I can zoom in and do the opening if you want, but I have a client at 10, so I can't stay for the whole meeting. He's like, that would be awesome. So then I came in like the head on the wall. Everybody else was in the boardroom, and I led them through a similar thing, like, what are your top goals? And the blah, blah, blah. And then I said, I have to go, but these are the questions I want. I left them homework for the other hour 15 of their meeting. Never done that before. So then fast forward to lunch that day, he phones me from lunch and he's like, that was the best team meeting we've ever had in the history of the company. What do you charge for those meeting boosters? And I said, what? He goes, the thing you did today, the meeting booster. So he even named it for me.
Love it.
Then he told another one of my clients there. And then that client actually called me at the end of the day and he's like, what the hell? How come you don't offer meeting boosters to my team? So guess what's on the menu now?
Meeting boosters.
Yes. I actually think it's a great idea for a lot of us in the training development coaching field because we're not there to supply the answers. We're there to guide and ask the questions.
Wow. If there's anything I'm picking up on as a theme through the conversation, I've gotten a lot of value so far.
I'm a mad scientist.
Well, including that, it's your focus is on asking good questions. And I think every entrepreneur listening, when you're an entrepreneur, that's part of your job, is asking good questions of vendors, asking good questions of customers, asking good questions of people who work in our businesses. I'd love to hear from you. How do you qualify a good question?
It makes you pause and think. If there's silence, when they usually go, that's a good question. Because it's probably something nobody else is asking them. I'm trying to PG this. Have the courage to ask the question nobody else will ask them. That was one of the things that I saw in corporate is like, you know what we talked about at dinner? Why didn't you bring that up in the meeting? Like, seriously. So have the courage to ask those hard questions that nobody else will ask them. A lot of my clients will say, you know, I have conversations with you that I've never had before in my life, not even with my husband or wife or my best friend. And part of that makes me a little sad as well, because what we avoid persists. And when you get that out there, you know, I'll say this. Years ago, I worked in New York City every fourth week. And the boss that I worked with there, she was like, no, just tell the success stories. And then one day I just went on a little bit of a, chase the squirrels during my presentation. And I said, you know what? The first time I came to present in New York City, I landed in Newark and I threw up in the airport because I was that nervous. And people got it. And then I started like just being real. And that was the biggest opening. And the worst thing was I actually got in trouble after that. She's like, no, nobody wants to hear that. No, you're totally wrong. Everybody wants the truth. And that was the thing that actually started to open things up for me when I was just honest. You know what? I'm going to come out here. I'm probably going to make a few mistakes. I might swear, I don't know, but you're going to get the same guy that you would take out to dinner or to a hockey game. I guarantee that. And you call me out if I'm not the same. And I think that that's the real gift. That's why I do invite and referral only, because I'm not for everybody. I just had a call yesterday from a big former corporate client. I'm like, yeah, I'm not for you anymore. And so what do? They're like, more money? I'm like, no, we're different. Like, my friends, a couple of my friends love soccer and they took me to a soccer game a couple of years ago and I had a great time. At the end of the night, one of my buddies goes, so are you a soccer fan? No, he goes, and I said, no, I had a great time. I still don't. It's not my thing. I'm more of a hockey, football guy, baseball guy, but all the power to you. If we brought that attitude to work, like quit trying to force things on other people. If they don't get it, they don't get it. That's fine. I always get the name wrong. I think it was Kevin Kelly wrote an article many years ago, 1,000 True Fans. So if you had 1,000 true fans in the world's a big place, right? Like, especially now, I live in Canada and 95% of my clients do not even live in Canada. So his premise, and this was maybe 15 years ago when he wrote this, so you could Google 1,000 true fans. If you had 1,000 true fans in the world that loved your product or service, and they spent $100 a year, it's not a lot of money, you have a $100,000 business. If you try to cater to the numbers game and say, well, there's 1 million people, and if I get 1%, yeah, you know what? I like a big fish in a small pond. And you know what? When I'm a big fish in a small pond, my food tastes better. I sleep better at night. My relationships are better. And I love my clients. They love me. And so that's what I prefer.
Powerful. One last question about the power of questions and asking good questions. Do you have any book or video or asset, or is there anything where if somebody's listening and says, okay, I get it. When someone pauses, that's a sign of a good question. When somebody says, that's a good question, that's a way of pausing so they can think about how to answer it. Somebody who's listening and says, okay, I get it. That's the indicator of a good question. How do I get more skilled up on what are good questions? Do you have any quick reference or kind of cheat sheet that we may be able to offer our listeners?
So I would say I'm going to save the money. I bought a bunch of books and there's a couple of them behind me, but you could just Google good questions, right? Or Google good business questions. But I actually wouldn't start there. I would start with, who are the clients that I love? What keeps them up at night? What are the questions that I am like, nobody else is asking these? What are the questions I'm really curious about? What are the questions that is the biggest block for them? And I would start with there, because you could get the list of questions. And I'll say this, and there's different kinds of coaches. I had one coach and she said, oh, I do about 2 hours prep before I go on a coaching call. She goes, how do you prep for a coaching call? I said, I usually go for a walk or maybe have a shower or maybe a nap. And she said, no, seriously, Shawn. And I'm like, I am being serious, because the thing is, I know where I want them to go and it's their dream. It's not my formula. I don't have like, here's lesson 1, 2, 3. Because I don't know, like, Rich, if we had a coaching call, I don't know what you went through in the last hour or the last 24 hours. Like, who am I to guess that and try to force my thing? Now, is that a much higher level of coaching? Absolutely. I will own that. Like, I couldn't have done that 5 years ago. But then, like, what's up? But some of the questions that I do ask is like, how can I serve you today? What would make this a powerful conversation for you? Those are a couple that I like, and they're like, yeah, so it's not like, can you help with my schedule? No, that's not powerful. Let's play bigger than that. What would make this more powerful? What's holding you back? Like, what's holding you back here? Like, but it's not, I don't have them written down before. I just kind of listen and feel where they're at, and then and kind of follow it from there.
You know, Shawn, you said something that I find to be very true, but I also struck me as very interesting, which is the quality of life is based on the quality of conversations.
Yeah.
And the quality of conversations, if I had to take that a step further, the quality of conversations are really built by the authentic questions that you ask of each other in such conversations.
Yeah.
If it's a, hey, what's up?
Yeah,
no, it's good. How you doing today? Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you? Oh, yeah. Well, how about the weather today? You know, all that BS.
Yeah.
But what's really challenging and difficult in personal life and in business life is to ask the questions that make you feel uncomfortable as the questioner.
100%, John.
Way too often we ask the easy questions. Tell me more about how let's personalize it. How can I ask more authentic questions? Because sometimes I'll ask the questions that I'm comfortable with because I want to build a relationship with somebody, but I don't want to be too obtrusive. I don't want to be too aggressive with but by asking those generalized questions, you're not really asking and building an authentic relationship.
So what I would say, so John, I don't know if you're too young for this reference, but do you remember Seinfeld, the show Seinfeld? Oh,
of course.
I'm not that young. Well, I don't know. You look pretty young. So they had an episode when George Costanza just did everything opposite. So he was in the diner, right? And he was like, yeah, well, whatever, tune on Ryan. No, like nothing has worked out for me. I'm going to do everything. So he does a total opposite. And then the girl looks over the counter and Elaine's like, go walk over. And he's like, usually bald, overweight, unemployed men that live in their mom's basement. And then he did everything opposite and things. So I actually use that as a challenge with my clients is, what can you do? Like have an opposite day. So for your questions, like write down what you'd usually ask and what's the opposite of that. So I'll tell you this, John, because everybody asks the same questions. When I went to kickboxing class, so we had the same class, and pretty well the same audience after work every day. How are you? How are you? And I would ask, and so some of the members would go, oh my God, I avoid Shawn because he never asks like an easy question. So I might ask, like, even in a social setting, I'm like, hey, what was the best part of your day? Gee, let me think about that. Or I'm like, what makes you come alive?
Yeah.
Wow. That's a good question, right? And those questions, I'll say that one about the what makes you come alive. I asked my first coaching group years ago. I had it at LinkedIn here in Toronto and in New York City. And there was one consultant, and they're very nice guy, very successful in his late 60s. And I asked that question to the group, what makes you come alive? And I was like, what's going on with him? Because he looked emotional. And then at the end of the day, he pulled me aside and he said, I didn't have an answer for that. I spent my whole career chasing the buck. And like he broke down. That's the power of a great question. And if they avoid the questions, right? So is there time for, I always start my meetings. Every single meeting is, what are the 3 biggest wins today? And even if it's 9 o'clock, I don't care if it was a great night's sleep, a great cup of coffee, because nothing good grows in bad energy, right? So we need to get in good energy first. And instead of like, I'll never forget this, because when I started doing the win, I'm like, oh, this works. Even in like high, like, oh, it changes the energy. And then I went into a meeting that was going to be pretty contentious. There was a lot of like, not so good things to be said in the meeting. I was like, no, I'm going all in. And so I said, give me 3 wins. And it took a while. And then we went around the room and they started laughing and sharing things, and it changed the meeting.
Yeah.
So the power of the question is so good.
Yeah, and as I'm reflecting on how can I ask more authentic questions, you have a really good testing ground, if you will, in the house, right? Your kids and your spouse, and way too often, right? You're seeing your kids after day of school. How was school today? Great. Conversation over.
Yeah.
Right.
So
how was work today? Yeah, it was good. Conversation over. Versus asking more, thoughtful, thought-provoking questions. And I think it's a fantastic challenge as an entrepreneur. Don't ever ask somebody the generic, how you doing today? And one thing, Rich, you and I learned way back when, and I think it was more along the lines of the power of positive thinking and positive messaging, was even if you're having the crappiest of days, when someone asks you, how are you doing? One of the answers we learned was pretty powerful, was incredible, or extraordinary, and they're like, oh wow, that's fantastic, like I couldn't have gotten in an accident, it's extraordinary bad or incredibly bad, but they took the positive message as something positive. But it always has people stop. They're like, oh really?
Yeah.
You're doing incredible. That's great.
Well, and it's so fun. So we don't have kids, but I've done a lot of work with kids, both at the elementary and secondary level, and bang on, because how's your day? You got to ask specific. It's like, who did you have lunch with today?
Yeah.
How did you feel today? What was something amazing that happened today? And I remember this way back early in my career. I don't even remember the speaker, but at the end of the day, what was something amazing, and what's something that you're looking forward to tomorrow? And because it's kind of like, they might have told us in marriage prep class, if I was paying attention, was, never go to bed angry. Yeah. But flip that is like, have the intention, then you're actually looking forward to something.
Yeah.
And it sounds ridiculously easy, but like simple is not the same as easy.
Yeah.
And I'll just say this in closing. My wife worked in downtown Toronto. She took the commuter train, which is about a half an hour. And then I wouldn't see her for, 9-10 hours. And we were both guilty of that. And I do this as a living. I pick her up with the train, and how's your day? I would be, traffic was horrible, blah, blah, blah. But we just do that. And then she had said one day, why don't we start with what was something amazing? And I'll never forget, John, the first day I was driving, and I was 2 lights from where I was picking her up. And I was like, oh my God, she's going to ask me. I got to think of something.
That's awesome.
But then it forced me to think. And then very quickly we got into the habit. And, it could have been like somebody smiled, somebody bought me a coffee. You know what happened? The quality of our conversations at dinner were way better. Our evenings were way better because we set ourselves up for success. And I say that to everybody in coaching to entrepreneurs. Give yourself a chance for success. Like when you're in bed in the morning and you wake up and you reach for this, you've already given up your day, right? Like you're in bed with your loved one, your family. Like let's celebrate that first.
Powerful. And last question for you, for those that are on Spotify or Apple, they wouldn't see it. Over Shawn's left shoulder is a plaque there that says, only coaches and players allowed beyond this point. Thank you. Shawn, tell us, why do you have that back there in the background for all the video calls you have?
Because that's the only people that I work with. I love sports. So I use the analogy of I'm Canadian, so surprise, surprise, I'm a hockey fan. So back when the arenas were full, there's that fan up there in the last row that's got 3 hot dogs in one hand, 2 beers, got mustard stain on the jersey. Respect the jersey. I don't care what team you play for. And he is sitting there yelling, you can't play, you're terrible. I am not for that guy. I am not the coach for that guy. I only work with the people that have the courage to get on the ice or on the field. I work too long trying to convince those people. You have to be coachable, and whatever your dream is your dream. So I say you got to be a player. Only players play. It takes courage to get on any field to play, and coaches. So when I only work with coaches or players, their success and happiness goes through the roof, and so is mine. The person in the stands is not for me. I don't coach those people.
And I'm sure those are the clients who you'd get energy from and you would rather work with. And you have it on the sign right behind you for everybody to see.
Well, and they don't want to be with the person in the last row. It's easy. There's the man in the arena, speech, right? It's easy to sit there and criticize. And you see that a lot on social media. I've got two friends. Yes, I am Canadian. So I have two friends that played in the NHL. And one of my buddies that used to play for the LA Kings came out and played with my beer league team. And so one of the guys, like the following week, one of the guys on my team says, "Oh, I looked him up and he only scored 4 goals in the NHL in his career." And I said, "Yeah, how many did you score?" Right? So it's easy to be a critic. I don't work with the critics.
Shawn, thanks for the entertaining, engaging, and useful conversation that I'm sure John and myself and our entrepreneurs will get a lot of value from in the future. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thanks, John and Rich. And anytime, I'm happy. As you can tell, you can ask me one question and I go off for a half an hour. So
that was terrific.
Love it. Go Habs.
All right. Oh, my God, you're killing me. All right. See you later, guys.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
You picked up on this. I had it written down. I even had it highlighted, but you commented on it back. Quality of our life is based on the quality of our conversations. And then you had paired, and the quality of our conversations is really driven by the quality of our questions.
Yeah, authentic questions, right? And thought-provoking questions. Way too often, I find, and as I was reflecting in the conversation here with Shawn, way too many times we get down to business or we're asking surface level questions. And what Shawn was kind of bringing out, and I think what he brings to small business entrepreneurs, he surely brought it to me and probably you as well today, is the way you ask your questions, how you're asking your questions, the type of questions you're asking, the type of questions you have the courage to ask is a big piece. Really determines how authentic your conversation is, and how authentic your conversations are the quality of your relationships. And Rich, if you think about it, look at our relationship. We had very authentic conversations.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's not a day I haven't spent with you where you haven't asked me authentic, challenging questions I had to respond to. I think it's an area that you really thrive in. But those conversations and those questions really build those relationships. And if you don't have a strong relationship with your kids or your spouse or family members or people in your business, it probably starts by having authentic conversations.
And you were so right on asking kids, right? How's your day? Good. What was your favorite part? Lunch. Other than lunch. Coming
Recess.
home. Yeah, recess. Coming home. I'm going to use that with the kids just to get practice at being really intentional with questions where they'll have some value in the answer. I liked one of the things he said, that as a coach, one of the things he does is get people out of low value activities. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, is that amazing? And you've got to, and then tying this back to questions, how would he know what are the low value activities? Can you imagine the number of questions that he would end up having to ask you, and good questions to have you reflect on what your low value activities are?
Well, I'll tell you what, Rich, he gave us the formula though.
He did.
And these quick start meetings. I mean, if I'm thinking about running a staff meeting in the next week, I would say, okay, everybody grab a piece of paper. And I'd say, number one, what are your goals in the next 3 years relative to this organization? Write them down. 3 goals for the next 3 years. what are the top 10 things you do on a weekly basis? Okay, now what are the top 2 of those 10 that you need to do to hit those 3 goals in the next 3 years? And then what are you going to do with the other 8? Delete it, delegate it, do something else with it, because you can't do them anymore.
Delegate, eliminate, reduce.
Right? And then he says, okay, I got to go now. Have authentic conversations because you guys got to figure this out because you have 8 things you can't do anymore. And I think when he drops those mics with teams, they have to have authentic conversations to solve that puzzle because everybody's going to have 10 things they got to do and now 8 things they can no longer do. But that one of those things may be something that's a priority on someone else's list and they got to try and figure it out. And way too often we don't have those authentic. He's talking about the book from Susan Scott, Fierce Conversations. We don't have those. And I think what he probably does really, really well within a small business, which is why he likes working with small businesses instead of larger businesses, it says, look, we have to have authentic conversations. Let's set the framework of what you guys need to talk about and then just unleash the team to have those conversations. I think it's genius. I think it's a really good format for figuring out, what you shouldn't be doing in terms of those low level activities.
When he said, have the courage to ask questions nobody else does. And I loved the way of evaluating if you nail the good question or not. Like for us as co-hosts, isn't it fun when we have a guest who goes, that's a good question. And you're like, okay, got a good one. Like they're doing a little bit of digging. It's not just surface we're getting out of that. One other thought that I'll share is I love the access point of what would you usually ask and ask the opposite instead of like, here's a list of questions for you to remember the questions and here's when to ask them the appropriate time. It's just, hey, whatever you would normally ask the opposite. You're going to have interesting questions. So I thought to myself, normally you'd say like, hey, how's your day going? Right. And I thought, okay, well, what's the opposite of that? Can you imagine if you and I asked people, hey, how's your month going so far?
Yeah.
Even just that, I don't know that day and month is the opposite, but it's a different question. So I love that access point, and I know I'm going to use that. What would I normally ask and to spice it up? Ask the opposite.
Yeah, and I think what I took from that as well is you gave the example of the opposite. You can even take it maybe a little step further, which is just never ask the same question twice.
Right.
Or don't ask the generic, hey, how are you doing? How's your day? Hey, what's up? Ask something that will truly get someone to say, oh, this has been like, I have a family function I'm at tonight here in Montreal. I'm going to ask my family members questions. They're going to be like, as I say, hey, how's it going? Nice weather today. I think it's those authentic questions. And as an entrepreneur in your team, if you start asking those authentic questions when you sit down with your team members one-on-one, you'll build those authentic relationships. Because one of those questions will certainly drive something that maybe happened with their family that was exciting, and you get to learn more about their family or other things that get you a little deeper into maybe something that's bothering them at work.
And your people will start asking you better questions and more authentic questions, and will kind of hone each other in the business and the solutions better.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah. Well, I think we've trained ourselves as entrepreneurs in our own businesses to ask really good business questions that challenge our team on what they should be doing or how they're doing what they're doing to execute better on the business performance. Okay, that's great. That doesn't help build authentic relationships. When a quality of life is based on the quality of conversations, it's not the business conversations that are asking about a specific customer and what you're doing for them and how it's going. It's really taking a step beyond that to really build those relationships. So, that's my biggest takeaway today for sure is really challenge myself on how I'm asking questions.
And how are you going to do that, John? Just kidding. You don't need to answer.
That's a good question. I don't know.